Good morning, everybody. We're going to start almost on time. The Commissioner is here. She'll be in a minute with her staff. But we'll kick off as we're on time anyway. So, very warm welcome to the meeting. My apologies that we had to cancel the December meeting, but we felt it was pitched 2 days before a general election. And I know a lot of the panel and a lot of the officers were very busy. And we decided that it wasn't the best time to have it 2 days before a general election, and it probably would have come up with more questions than answers actually at that time. But we also felt that we needed another meeting to be slotted in before the February the 4th meeting, because February the 4th will be about precept, and that's a very big subject, and there's a lot of stuff to cover off. So this meeting's been slotted in. So thank you very much. It's the first time I think we've had a police and crime panel meeting during the day for a very long time, a full meeting. So it's unusual in that respect. But item 1 on the agenda, questions from the members of the constituent councils and members of the public. Are there any questions? Yes, certainly. Okay. This item on the agenda is actually for questions from members of the public to the panel. Your question is aimed at the Commissioner. However, it is part of the agenda today where she will update on that. So that will be answered by the Commissioner in our normal agenda item, if that's okay. Okay, no other questions. We move on to agenda item 2 to receive any apologies for absence.
We've received apologies from Councillors Salim and Nawaz, and I can't see Councillor Donnellan, so we accept apologies from her as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Item 3 of the agenda, the minutes of the last meeting. Anybody got any queries or comments on minutes of the last meeting? No? I have one, which I don't think we'll be able to resolve today. Until the Commissioner's here anyway. Page number 9 under estates. Bedford Lime Street Hub was now open 7 days a week, is what it says in the minutes. That contradicts page 13 of the pack, where the panel requested opening times of Lime Street. This has now been confirmed to be open Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, not open on weekends at present. I wasn't at the meeting. Yes?
Sorry, I'm until open today's meeting. I haven't advised, but if it would help, I can give some clarification on that point.
I think we need to wait for the Commissioner, and then when she comes in, we'll raise it under the Lime Street thing. If she wants anything to comment, Jackie, that's fine. But at the moment, I think we'll leave it open. We'll pick it up when the Commissioner comes in. So I'm just confused. Okay. That was my only comment on the minutes of the meeting. If no one else has got any other comments, I'll sign the minutes as a true record. Okay. Yep. Thank you. And moving on very quickly, item number 4, disclosure of local or pecuniary interests. Any disclosures? Okay, none. Then we're waiting for item 5, and I will just tell you that I've just spoken to the Commissioner briefly because Kimberley's here with Jackie Sabir, our Assistant Chief Constable, to talk about the Veru presentation. Jackie has to go at 11:30, so rather than run the risk of running out of time by going through 5A to G first, we're going to move 5H to the top, but we're now just waiting for the Commissioner who wants to say a couple of words before she hands over to Kimberley. So thank you very much. Welcome. Do come in. We've started. I think you're down here, Catherine. I think the nameplates are all.
Would you give us a few techniques sitting here so that
That'd be fine. I can look straight at you then. We've been through item 1 to 4 of the agenda, Catherine. We've just got to item 5, and I've just explained that we are moving the Veru presentation up front. And as soon as you're settled and ready, I did say that you wanted just to say a few words of introduction before we start on that presentation.
So, good morning, everybody. It's very unusual for us to be meeting, obviously, during the day rather than in the evening. As you can hear, I have very limited voice because I've been down with the lurgy that has been laying low much of Bedfordshire and the southeast of England. So I will probably not be speaking at the normal volume or at length as I do in normal meetings. Before we get to the very presentation, I'm going to explain to you exactly why I've decided that it should be set up in this way, because the funds come directly to me and the OPCC to manage, in contrast to some other areas of the country and the slightly different emphasis that we have in Bedfordshire. But when we do come to my update, I'm obviously intending to, because I assume that everybody's read the paperwork, to take questions from you along with my Chief Finance Officer and Chief of Staff, rather than talking you through every element of the programme. So if I take questions when we get there. Thanks very much, Chair.
Okay, Kimberly, the floor is yours.
Right, great. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Chair. So my name is Kimberly Lamb. I'm the head of the Violence and Exploitation Reduction Unit. There are 18 VRUs in the country, so we are Bedfordshire, one of the 18. As Catherine has said, the Commissioner has said, she has strategic oversight of the VRU, and I'm there to manage the day-to-day running of it. The Violent and Exploitation Reduction Unit started off from scratch in September of last year. We are now steadily building a team of different elements within that unit, and that came from the framework that was put in the initial bid there. The whole idea for the Violent Reduction Unit, ourselves along with the other 17, is to have a whole system approach to reducing violence. Our emphasis for ourselves is to look at things like the reduction of presentations to A&E and things like that, to do early interventions, programmes, and to work with the community, but most importantly with our partnership and our key stakeholders in Bedfordshire, so that we can get this whole system public health approach to reducing violence. So as I mentioned, we were only really up and running 3 months ago, so that meant finding our premises, me building a team, which there are 6 of us at the moment, but it will steadily increase to about 12 of us. So the core function is overseen by a strategic board, an oversight board, and that comprises of our Bedfordshire partners, so that will include our local authority, health, CCG, education, very important there, that we have that as well. And then we also are implementing a tactical operational board, which operates via my office, which will include important elements, I believe, which will be the community, young people and housing, for example, there. The ethos of this whole system approach is quite simply making sure that what happens is that we have the voice of young people involved, the voice of the community. I think what also is important to point out is that we're not reinventing the wheel. We're working with existing, so we're looking at mapping existing services that are out there that work with young people in terms of prevention, diversion and other areas there. So mapping that, having a look what works and working with that, but also all importantly, which is an expectation from us for a Home Office, look at any gaps in services so that we can work collectively to make sure that we deal with that. There are different things that within my team, so I have a public health registrar supporting me and a public health analyst. Again, that is in support of a product that we're expected to produce to the 31st of March for the Home Office, which is what they call the problem profile. And quite simply, that's a needs assessment, having a look at what the needs are for Bedfordshire and what we need to do, what we've identified, so that can inform anything else that we use moving forward from April in terms of, again, looking at the reduction of violence and really, I think most importantly, having a look at those primary interventions and looking at a younger age group. Now, how we're doing that is there has been a commissioning via the OPCC's office of community projects, and those vary from projects that will be rolled out in schools. Again, most importantly, I think working very closely with the young people who are impacted or involved in some of the violence that we're hearing about. So there's a lot of work being done in alternative provisions. There's a lot of what I call grassroots work. I would be quoted many times as saying the importance of what we do is great, working in partnership with stakeholders, but our main key stakeholders are the community. So that is reflected really in some of the projects that we've commissioned, and that will involve anything from working with some young people who are very disengaged, perhaps not even engaging with the alternative provisions. It also involves working with some of our young people at the point at which they are coming into contact with law enforcement. So we have BOSUN that works closely, works within the Bedfordshire Police. We have a project that works with our BOSUN arm within Bedfordshire Police, and that again will be using that as a touch point. Any young people that are known to the police, we will be getting involved, and the whole idea of that project, which is separate from the individual community projects, is for us to have a wraparound care, which is a service that will look at our young people and work with them, whether they're victims, whether they're witnesses, and I think importantly to mention whether they're perpetrators as well. And that project means that we'll have a look at the root causes, perhaps, of why some of those are coming into contact with law enforcement. So again, not to interfere with what we do appreciate, certainly as a violent reduction unit, we appreciate that there is a need for enforcement and we will be supporting that where we can. But actually, I think the most important work that we do as a VERA is to understand that what we're trying to do is identify that a lot of these young people that we're coming across, again, victims, perpetrators, witnesses, not so much witnesses, sorry, excuse me, victims and perpetrators are one of the same thing, and many of whom are being criminally exploited. So the model that we're using in terms of our community projects that we've commissioned there is to look at them in terms of those who are doing preventative work, those who are doing diversionary work. Something that I had to ensure happened with our independent panel was to make sure that we perhaps, and I'm a Lutonian, so I say this in a nice way, we're not too Luton-centric in thinking that that's where the issue solely lied. And that's reflected in the way that we've commissioned. We've made sure that we commission throughout Bedfordshire, which is what our remit should be, and we're looking at the issues that are localised, making sure we've got community projects that work with those localisation, and also making sure that we bring together a cohesive strategy which is being overseen by the OPCC's office to ensure that when we're dealing with young people, particularly again in the primary schools, that it's age appropriate. We're dealing with things like joint enterprise, the understanding of that, that's rolled out in some of our communities. Okay, to continue.
You're on.
Just take a 5-minute break, everybody, please.
Chair, do you think we should...
Ready to continue. Alison's in the first aid room being looked after by the first aiders. An ambulance has been called, so hopefully she'll be okay. And there's people staying with us, so I think we can continue. So, Kimberly, our apologies for that. Totally unexpected, but if you could continue and sum up where you were. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. I'll round up quite quickly and pass back over to the Commissioner. So I think the bottom line, what I was saying, is that there's a lot of reflection as to what was the best thing to do in terms of the Community Commission and community projects, making sure that these projects were reflective of the communities that we're trying to impact throughout the whole of Bedfordshire. I've had fantastic support from local authorities and from our key stakeholders. Education, which is really important. I've had great support from headmasters and people out there. One of the main things I want to impress upon you and leave with you is that not only are we targeted, of course, and I hate that word target, but it is one, for the Home Office to produce what they call a product, which is this problem profile, this needs assessment. What do we need? How do we use that to inform how we move forward and create sustainability? but also it's been a good time for us to reflect as to how we work as a partnership. And I say we, I'm seconded from the PCC's office, so policing if you like. And one of the things that I have been really pleased and comforted to see is the way that we're now working on our data sharing. That's another product, another report that we want to be able to, with pride, show the Home Office on the 31st of March that we've worked together as a partnership to share our data, because when we come back to serious youth violence, whether it's admissions to A&E, whether it's the statistics produced by the policing, it's very important that we map across and we understand what's going on in the schools, what's being reported in terms of knife crime, who is presenting to the A&E in terms of any acts of violence, and what that means and how that's reflected in the policing records, and so forth. And I have to say, and to share with you now, that we're getting a lot of good partnership work that's going on at the moment. We're not complete, quite clearly. We've only started in September, but there are some good conversations, some good sharing of data, some good work around data sharing, because, of course, we need those agreements in place. And I'm confident that by the 31st of March, we should be able to get a really good look at what our situation is in terms of Bedfordshire, in terms of the needs, and what we need to do in terms of root causes to try and work, I think, sustainably. I know the Commission will talk to you about that. We know nothing can be done by the 31st of March, but we certainly can make inroads. So thank you very much.
Commissioner.
Thanks very much indeed, Kimberly. So obviously you hold me to account rather than Kimberly or ACC Sabir behind me, so I thought I'd explain to you first of all why it is that, having achieved the money for the Veru, which is £880,000 for a year to be spent in a year, with the promise, effectively, that the Home Office is prepared to repeat that in the next year if it approves the plans that I put to it for 2021. Why we set it up this way? Because some of you will be aware that among the other 18 Verus around the country, PCCs like David Jemison in West Midlands have in fact simply created a division of their own staff within an OPCC to spend this money. It was my judgment that working with 3 unitary local authorities, each a different shade of the political spectrum, that it was actually imperative to take it out of any environment which might be considered in any way tangentially political. And as you know, I do not do this job in a political way in terms of either national or local politics, but it seemed absolutely essential to me that that was the case. Kimberly knows that we've been talking for almost 2 years now, before she came in to work with the OPCC, originally as the signpost manager, that she would be particularly ideally placed to come into early intervention, and particularly if we were able to win the funding out of the for the Veru, out of the Home Office for one of these 18 units, because of her very extensive experience around young people, around independent scrutiny of Bedfordshire Police through the Stop and Search Scrutiny Panel, which is where, of course, you've met her before as the Deputy Chair who's come to address you with Montel Nerfville in the past, and her various relationships with schools as a trustee and so on. She knows the communities inside out, and it was particularly valuable to me that she was able to transfer over from signpost to become the day-to-day operational manager and project manager in charge of the Veru. I'm also absolutely indebted to ACC Sabir, who's with us and who can also take questions from you, though of course you don't hold her to account either, but who can take questions as well. Whilst I obviously was advancing the arguments directly with the Policing Minister and the Home Secretary, and indeed the police funding team at the Home Office, I think that I absolutely have to recognise and have you recognise the role of Jackie, who is of course the NPCC, National Police Chiefs Council's national portfolio lead for serious violence in this. We've had a visit already from the Home Office team headed up by Lynn Abrahams, who indicated how incredibly impressed they are with how fleet of foot Bedfordshire has been, setting up the Veru, with its leadership, its participation across the local authorities, from the Youth Offending Service, the health element and so on. The fact that grant funding of approximately £350,000 is about to be announced to community groups of the type that Kimberly has already very ably described to you. Moving forward, of course, you will all appreciate from a governance perspective, which is your interest, that if you're having to move particularly quickly, you have to set up a unit, you have to house it, you have to recruit to it, you have to get it delivering within a year, there'll inevitably be elements of housekeeping that you'll have to put right subsequently if you're running this and want to be absolutely certain that it's sustainable moving into the future. That's why I've asked for external verification of every single one of the salaries in the Vero, and how that is done is it's delivered through the BCH combined HR department, and they then bring on board an external verification company, so that not only are we comparing salaries within the Vero across the whole of policing, but we're comparing it across the whole of the public sector, locally, regionally and nationally, so that you can have assurance as a panel that everybody is being paid appropriately. And then moving beyond that, we're having advice from the HR department that because this is now unlikely to be a 12-month project, it's at least likely to be a 24-month project, and I've argued with the Home Office that they need to fund it for a generation. They need to fund it for at least 20 years. So I was asked the question during the Home Office visit, when will this be business as usual? And I've said that as in Germany, where the German government embarks on 20-year funding projects, if you want to know for certain and be able to prove it, that something has affected the life chances of the next generation, you have to fund it for a generation. So if this is going to be sustainable and run into the long, long term, the HR department will have to advise us as to whether we now have to run a formal recruitment process as well. Because obviously you would expect, you know me, I dot the I's and I cross the T's when it comes to public money, and that's what will happen as we move forward. The grants are being allocated. There were independent members of the panels who sat. Because everything had to be done so quickly, unfortunately, neither my Chief of Staff nor I could sit on those panels, but you appreciate that the OPCC is the organisation within policing with the experience and the day-to-day responsibility for accepting grants, commissions, and then, importantly, overseeing a thorough and comprehensive audit of those decisions and of the spending over a year. So we will very much be involved with that with Kimberly and the team. And then in the next year, if we are lucky enough to receive the funding, obviously we'll be sitting on those panels. There are other side benefits of this. Houghton Regis has received effectively a police presence in-house, double one actually. I was going to return to this within my update. The first element of this is that the Vero is now being housed as a physical location, incredibly important to both of us, that there's a co-location of the staff in an actual physical unit, so they're in the former Houghton Regis police station. And also there's a double benefit because the neighbourhood enforcement team that you've heard me to discuss at length at the panel of the Sergeant and 9 PCs, which is being created to flex around the county to deal with particularly pernicious problems arising at neighbourhood level, that they are also being built and being based currently out of that Houghton Regis station, which I'm sure will be particularly welcome to them. In fact, I'm having a public surgery and a meeting with the Town Council at Houghton Regis tonight. I'll pass that information on to them as well. The other important element for me to add here, and Kimberly touched on it in her presentation, is we're different in Bedfordshire. The word exploitation has been built into the Vero. Elsewhere it's simply Violence Reduction Unit. Violence and Exploitation Reduction Unit, because of exactly what Kimberly said, that those who are victims of serious youth violence today are as likely to be perpetrators tomorrow or yesterday. This is a continuously interchangeable group, it's highly nuanced, and obviously there is a very strong reason why you need to divert both groups out of serious youth violence, gang crime, gun crime and knife crime. And that is why we've built that in. It was first raised with me by David Collins of the Luton Youth Offending Service that he felt this should be our approach. It's been enthusiastically embraced across the Vero partnership and also by me. And my office is responsible for the submissions that must go into the Home Office in terms of ensuring that the funding is being correctly spent as we move forward, because as you would imagine, they're keeping a very close eye on the Vero spending. So in terms of Vero, I'd like to leave it there, if I may, Chair, so that you members have the opportunity to ask questions.
Thank you. Could I just ask for a quick update from Jackie from the force point of view? Jackie Sabir is our Assistant Chief Constable. as Catherine's just said, very heavily involved in it. So, Jackie, anything you want to add to the setup?
Hi, good morning everybody. I'm Jackie Spear, I'm the Assistant Chief Constable, and as the Commissioner said, I'm the National Police Chiefs Council Lead for Serious Violence, and helpfully I've also been asked to sit on the National Steering Committee for Violence Reduction Units, so I do have a bit of an inside track which is very helpful. The Home Office granted policing 2 pots of money, and Bedfordshire were one of the 18 forces. The 880, as you've already heard, for setting up the Violence Reduction Unit, but also 1.8 million to deal with enforcement activity, and again the returns have to go in. So we've partnered very closely with the Bureau because clearly we have to clear the ground under our feet. We have a lot of dangerous individuals that we need to track and target, arrest and, if necessary, put through the criminal justice process. How it is now working now the Bureau is up and established, when we do vast operations and identify a large number of young people, for instance in the last Operation Pepworth, we have 25 young people that are being exploited. They have been directly referred in to the Bureau, and through Kimberly and her team they're working out the different triage levels of support or signposting them to other areas. So in terms of a whole systems approach, in terms of policing, we don't actually have any police officers in the Bureau, and again that's a very unusual approach. I've seen all 18 violence reductions units, and the Home Office are really interested in what we're trying to do because we've got a very different national approach. And I think a lot of that is because we've been very reflective and we know what works. We've had a lot of evidence base to see actually how can we do something slightly different and more sustainable. We will lose the surge funding at some point. It's not a bottomless pit, unfortunately, but what we would want to do is ensure that early intervention and support, that this generational impact actually does happen. And I'm really happy to take questions on either the enforcement or the Bureau.
Thank you very much for that. Any questions from the panel? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question about the evaluation framework. So what are some of the key metrics of the Bureau, and how will you know that you've made these inroads into violence reduction or exploitation? I don't know who to direct the question to, but...
I'll start. Part of the evaluation process is almost enforced, if I can put it that way. We are working with a company that has been commissioned by the Home Office called Chorus, that evaluates every activity that not only we do, but also that's done within the other VRUs. That is a combination of surveys, weekly phone calls, one-to-one meetings on there, and really some of those key measurements are things that seem a little bit, I think, out there at the moment, given that we've just started, but it's things around reductions of admissions to A&E that I mentioned earlier. I believe some of these are being challenged at some stage as well but it's those type of measurements. It's looking at the primary intervention, the secondary interventions, the tertiary interventions, attitudinal change, which is less easy to measure. But we're not just relying on what the Home Office wants as well. We have an external evaluator coming in that we've commissioned, which is from the University of Bedfordshire, Professor Joanne Adler, who will be working with us, particularly around our project around that Boson area, where I've said we've got those touch points where we have those who are known to police, and just that interaction there where we can sort of look at some of the diversion measurements. We've got that in place, and then also there are other, I think it's Ipsos as well, so there are other people who are really interested in working with VRUs and seeing how they're measuring things as well. So we've got quite a few bit of scrutiny, in addition to, of course, as the Commissioner mentioned, her own office providing, you know, the scrutiny in terms of those measurements and distance travelled as well.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Amanda.
Yeah, in your presentation you talked about the importance of doing projects out in the rural communities and our smaller market towns. I wondered if you could tell me a bit more about what projects are planned and how you're identifying the young people to go into those projects.
So don't know if I can give you specifics because I'll be honest with you, I haven't got my glasses here and I had some in there. But I will tell you, we've got one in Sheffield, that's what I was talking about. We've got one in Sheffield, so there's a number of things to answer your question there. How they're identifying the young people, that will be done at project level, of course. But in terms of the grant bids, I know that there's a particular project that talks about, redoing up an area, a space for young people there. But what I did like about it, and I don't know if that's the project you're talking about to answer your question, is that they talked about going out to young people, looking for them in open spaces like parks and bits and pieces where they hang out. It will be all of our projects have committed to reaching out to local schools, trying to engage with young people via that area there. But going back to grassroots, many of them equally, and that's the reason for their selection, have talked about literally pounding the streets, going out, doing surveys, seeing what young people want, trying to get them to engage via sports and different bits and pieces there. I'm trying to think of another one that we've also got again, that's in Central Beds, I'm sure. We're doing some work around a radio station that's working with young people. We're going to putting together their own radio station there. And again, how do we reach them? It will be the ordinary avenues, which is via the schools. One of them is via religious houses, actually, on there. But again, what I like, and I haven't seen none of the VRUs there, there is a commitment to working in partnership with other groups who are working with young people, but most importantly, getting out there, speaking and engaging with some of these people, young people who are considered to be antisocial, perhaps hanging around in parks and things, but actually they're not antisocial in rural areas. This is where they hang out. This is, this is how they gather together.
And just one thing, if it would be okay, Chair, just to add on to that. We're very clear that a lot of this has been focused on young men, and actually we were really clear that we wanted to have young women involved in this as well. On the 20th of February, we've got a dance competition again, but whilst the competition is great, the whole point is about awareness about exploitation, sexual exploitation, county lines and drug running as well. So just that some of those, you wouldn't necessarily think a dance competition would involve that, but actually we have the referrals and lots of support there for the schools. I think we've got 17 schools that will be contributing to that as well. So we have a pan-Bedfordshire, a true pan-Bedfordshire county-wide approach to this.
Ian.
So I have a couple of concerns. One, my main concern, to be quite frank, is the lack of long-term funding for this, which government needs to be really pressed, because I think you're doing huge amounts of work on this, obviously. But if that funding dries up in 24 months or 18 months or whatever, then it's all for nothing, because how do we continue to engage these children and these young people on this journey so they don't drop off? And where we're seeing this massive increase in county lines and there's exploitation of young people, I have concerns that unless we get that funding on a more permanent basis, we're going to get turned over, quite frankly. So I think it beholds all of us who sit with political hats on, I think, to try and influence government at different levels and our MPs and everybody else to ensure you get that continued funding. And that's one of the things, obviously, I will try and do in my role. Kimberly, you wrote to me on the 4th of September and you laid out your vision for the Veru, and I wrote back afterwards to say, actually, I would really be interested to come and meet and find out a lot more about it, given the fact that I look after community safety within Central Beds Council, and I'm also on the Executive Board of Community Safety Partnership. And I didn't get a response. And I was quite disappointed in that because, 2 seconds, let me finish what I'm going to say. And then last week I sat and did the pre-meeting for the Community Safety Partnership that's coming up, and the concerns raised with officers within Central Beds, and I can't speak for Bedsborough or for Luton, was the engagement isn't as good as we'd like it to be in terms of the Veru. And then your presentation touched on lots and lots of things in terms of engagement, community partnership and all the rest of it. But I think we need to maybe just look at that again, because from my side, the Central Beds officer side, they've raised with me, even just last week, that lack of engagement, or what they feel is a lack of engagement. So somewhere there's a bit of a disparate gap, I think. So I'd like to be a driver for that within Central Bedfordshire Council, okay, because all that area sits within my remit as the executive member. So can I ask that we can organise a meeting just to see how we can improve that joined up working with Central Beds, please?
Thank you. In response to that, and that's perhaps something that I need to go back and have a look, I did contact your office and give them several dates, and they will come back to me. I cannot remember the lady's name, so to be fair, I think I'll dig that out, perhaps forward that to you. And on several occasions I gave some dates, and perhaps I need to go back in case I've missed anything on there. You know, just for the record, I will look into that. But I do remember coming back to you a number of times on that. In terms of the gap, I work quite closely with the CSPs, with the schools within Central Bedfordshire in there, and I think it's a worthy comment that, of course, I must follow up, and I'll be delighted to meet with you to let you know who I have been engaging with, how we have been engaging, and identify if there's any gaps there that needs to be filled. So that's 2 actions I'll take away. Thank you.
If I may say, in fairness to Kimberly, as she has pointed out herself, the unit effectively has been up and running in situ for just under 3 months. And so obviously she will check her contact with you, Ian. You make an extremely perceptive comment, of course. We need this to be sustainable. You would expect me to battle robustly. I fought to get the money in the first place for this, and in their own separate spaces, so did Jackie and so did Kimberly. And I will continue to fight, as will the OPCC as a whole moving forward, to ensure that this money is sustainably provided. Because as I've said to the Home Office and repeat here, I was asked, when will this be business as usual? It will be business as usual when we have funded forward to the next generation. Now, as you rightly say, as you hold the community safety portfolio, you and our other 2 community safety portfolio leads in the unitary authorities are arguably the 3 most important people for us to engage with as a Vero moving forward, to make sure that you as the elected members are fully cited, and also those who head up community safety partnership executive boards. There has been a lot of engagement with the unitary authorities. It hasn't been an easy path, as I'm sure that Jackie and Kimberly will be able to confirm, because we've done something different. The money is outside local authority control, and it's fair to say that there's a fair degree of suspicion, or certainly at the outset, over where the money was coming from. I hope that the Community Safety Partnership executives themselves would get it. I think we can move past any petty jealousies and suspicion now to the point where we can assure you that the Home Office sees ours as the absolute project-leading platinum standard for moving forward nationally. What we now have to do is to connect with you and prove it.
Chair, can I just come back to the first part of your question, if I may, around the sustainability? Because an element that Kimberly put into the application forms before she launched the opening process for bids was that she specifically said to people, what is your plan for when the money runs out? Where do those young people go? And no one was allowed to get through that early stage of bidding unless Kimberly was confident in that plan. Was it going back to YOS? Was it going back to a local authority? So just to offer you that local assurance. I know it's not the national, but it helps for us.
Frankly, a bit for me, and thank you, Catherine, is actually how do we leverage this for our communities? There's so much going on now with county lines and all these other issues, and it's using all of our resources as local authorities to support what you're trying to do. From my point of view, it's making sure that we're doing that at Central Beds level, and I'm sure my colleagues here representing the other 2 authorities would want the same.
And if I could add to that, Ian, also from my point of view, because as you know, I became PCC for Bedfordshire in order to help it get its communications right with Home Office so that the grants and funding would flow in our direction, as every single member of this panel has seen that they have over this 4-year period, virtually 4-year period while I've been here. What that means is being able to prove to ministers what more do they get from more. That is the buzz phrase that exists within the Home Office now. And with the help of Jackie and Phil, immediately before Christmas, they drew together all the information for me so that I could put to them what are the actual results that we're achieving from that 1.38 million uplift funding and from the Vero, so that we could tell them, show them, demonstrate. In terms of enforcement, they've got 200 years of imprisonment since they've put money into the uplift through a combination of the special grant of 4.71 million to me and also the uplift monies. We are starting to see a levelling out, a plateauing of hospital admissions over knife crime incidents and so on. It is working, and we can prove that it is, and are proving that it is, directly to the Policing Minister and Home Secretary.
Phil, I think you wanted... No?
Alison.
Okay, Alison.
Okay. I think that's very interesting, Kimberly. Thank you very much. I would like, if possible, maybe in a few months' time, to hear a report from you on the cooperation that the various local authorities have given you, individualising each local authority so that we can see where there are failures of communication or cooperation, because I think the local authorities do need to work very, very closely with the police. I'm not sure that always happens.
Yeah, a very good idea. We'll do that.
Okay, no further questions. A big thank you. Apologies again for the delay in the middle, but it couldn't be helped. Thanks very much. I've got to say, from my perspective, that's being set up very, very fast. But we've got to be. But thanks very much, Kimberly. Thank you very much, Jackie. Right, we move on with the agenda. Back to item 5A, the Commissioner's update priorities. We've all had the report. Everyone's read the report. Have you anything new to add, Commissioner, before we start asking questions on it?
I'm going to add some comments around funding, because you'll appreciate that because of the general election, that the policing settlement for the year that we would normally anticipate in December hasn't in fact taken place yet, which is not helpful to me in terms of making my medium and short-term financial plans. However, we are now told today that the 23rd of January will be when the settlement is announced. I'm assuming that the special grant will be announced then too. As you know, I've had in writing from Nick Hurd and Kit Malthouse, as two successive policing ministers, that I will again be in receipt of a second unique special grant for Bedfordshire. It has been my judgment that you can't ask the people of Bedfordshire in the survey which I have to carry out to effectively give their views on my precept rise if I don't know what my budget's going to be and I don't know what my special grant is going to be. Originally, we were expecting this announcement to be made on the 31st, and those of you who are familiar with procedure will see that that would have given me precisely 24 hours to survey partners and the public. However, we now effectively have a week, and my office will be drawing the attention of all the partners who are on our newsletter list, for example, and all of our key partners that we work with to the survey the moment that it's out. As you'd expect, Phil has been crunching the numbers. I am not anticipating the same degree of leeway that I've had in previous years, certainly last year, to increase the precept, which you'll recall was at £2 a month, the £24 increase. However, what I would say is this. I have not been crying wolf when I've gone to the Home Office with the very specific data and evidence over this almost 4-year term to prove that Bedfordshire Police is extremely short on its front line, as well as 80 short in terms of detectives. We've had some very specific modelling work done around just how short currently and what the demand looks like as we move forward through the respected consultancy Crest, which directly advises and presents to the Policing Minister. Phil is doing a specific piece of work right now so that irrespective of the settlement that we get, we can again go back and say with the very precise evidence, this is how many officers we are short, and therefore obviously it is incumbent on me to make sure that I do my part to raise the front line as far as possible. I already referred to the fact in a previous meeting that the first 18 months of the 20,000 uplift is going to be based on the flawed national funding formula, and that means that Bedfordshire Police will acquire 54 extra posts, which you will all be aware falls far short of the total that I have provided evidence are required here in this county. So I will be likely to use the maximum precept uplift at my disposal without holding a referendum. And new members should be aware that the reason that I would not consider holding a referendum in this county is that once all costs were taken into account, including the legal and the time of the PCC and the office, that referendum cost Bedfordshire Police £1 million that it could ill afford.
Okay. Can I take any questions on item 5A, the Commissioner's update? Councillor Hendricks.
Yes, I wondered whether we or when we could have some more information on the signpost review, because I understand that that review has now kind of been finalised, so it would be good if we could perhaps get that on the agenda next time.
We'll be bringing that to the next Police and Crime panel. It hasn't been fully completed as yet. As you'll appreciate, that we've moved into different territory in the interim, not least setting up the Veru and setting up the new SART, Sexual Assaults Referral Centre, which will be opening officially launched on the 10th of February, and you will all be invited to that launch. We are then going to Claire will be completing the review of Signpost. As I said previously, it was important to me not only that it was, as it is, recognised by the police watchdog HMIC FRS for so-called notable practice, in other words, the gold standard for all police forces in terms of its process, but that we make sure that we have the right number of people for the calls that are coming in, that we're working over the correct number of hours, that the management structure is correct, and so on. At the moment, for example, Claire, as Chief of Staff, is having to engage with a new police lead every 18 months or so. And as Chief Finance Officer and as Assistant Chief Officer for the Force, Phil has pointed to the fact that he wants it to be sustainable for Claire in terms of management. If we're not going to have a permanent individual who's in place in terms of policing, and we do have a permanent individual who's in place in terms of the Chief of Staff, and that it was my business case and I fund it, it seems logical to me that as long as the Force can assure us that it will continue to work as cooperatively as it does, and to an even greater extent, particularly over the initial victims' needs assessments that officers have to submit to Signpost from their frontline encounters with victims, that it would more properly come under the overall management of the OPCC. But that will be determined by the review. So certainly we'll be bringing that back to you at the next panel.
Can I just quickly ask, as an addition to that, who's managing Signpost currently? I'm aware Kimberly was the manager. What's happening at the moment?
I'm going to get Claire to talk through the existing management structures. She has been, in fact, conducting the review, and the position with regard to the police lead. Thank you.
Thank you, and I really welcome the suggestion of the April meeting for the findings of the review. That would fit nicely. We presented the options paper on Signpost last Thursday at Strategic Board, and there was an agreement that we would go out and make some final inquiries into all three options that were presented before a decision is made. So by April, we can actually give you the delivery plan of how those recommendations are going to be conducted. To answer your question, Chair, currently we have one of the supervisors acting up as the manager. However, that arrangement was in place when we thought the funding for the Veru was until the end of March. That will now need looking at in the fullness of time with HR, so it needs to be processed. The actual line management reporting line goes into the Superintendent for Crime with Bedfordshire Police, and that ultimately goes to a Chief Superintendent and up the chain. The OPCC holds the governance because they hold the direction for Signpost. One of the options that we're looking at is whether you pull, and as the Commissioner has described, all of that line management back into the OPCC. One of the supporting ideas around that is that, as I'm sure you all know, the statutory obligations of a PCC are to ensure that the victim services in Bedfordshire are, one, financed properly, two, set up in the correct way, and three, the right amount of referrals are going through. And I just think that one of those options needs to look at that we have a more hands-on approach. So that's why that's there. So no decision as yet, but it will come back through.
Okay, can I just clarify that when you say you'll have the signpost review at the next meeting, you're not talking February the 4th, you're talking about the April meeting. February the 4th is going to be a bit busy on
The
precept,
April one,
I think.
please,
Yeah, okay, just to clarify. Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Yes, I agree it's disappointing that we're not going to be getting huge numbers of officers into Bedfordshire. And I know the public desperately want more police visibility, and 54 officers isn't going to go very far. I note in the report you talk about the role of specials, and I wondered where we were in terms of recruitment of specials and also the retention of specials, and indeed the retention of police officers across the board.
So again, we have companies, almost all companies of any degree of size, has a corporate social responsibility lead. And it's not enough to me to talk about wanting to help your communities and doing so in a really piecemeal way. There is a real opportunity here for, in paid time, larger organisations, through their corporate social responsibility arrangements, to release individuals to become specials. And indeed, I know that one of the candidates for the mayoralty in Bedford Borough had been intending to make that offer to all of the staff officers at Bedford Borough Council. Now, I would, of course, be delighted, and we have a Bedford Borough member here, if that could be taken up and moved forward. And Ian, from your perspective as the Head of Community Safety at Central Bedfordshire, and your opposite number at Luton, you have huge bodies of individuals with some transferable skills, with an awful lot to gain, benefit from, around dispute resolution and everything from dispute resolution through to first aid. It hasn't happened, and not for want in terms of my approaches to the commercial world, for asking. And because that has fallen on deaf ears ultimately, despite a lot of presence at initial meetings from larger companies, for example, in retail, our larger employers in the county, I think it's to the local authorities that we need to turn next.
David.
Good morning, Commissioner. I have a couple of questions about things that something you've said this morning and before, but I'll start on the issue of recruitment. I understand that there's the 100 replacement officers to account for natural wastage and 60 extras, and then there's the issue of the government's proposed additional officers, which obviously you weren't expecting until recently. On page 12 of your October 2019 handout, you say that we've been told to expect around 18 officers, so 54 is a significant improvement and reflects the fact that the Home Office is fully aware that Bedfordshire has to be treated as a special case, and that is the 54 officers that you just mentioned, in addition to the 160 of ordinary recruitment. On the first page of that handout, you described there that the government decided, and the National Police Chiefs decided, that it was too difficult to allocate officers any other way than the normal pro rata split. These seem to be inconsistent statements.
Well, they're not.
Perhaps I'm misunderstanding.
Yes, I think you are, Damien.
Thank you.
So, just to clarify, there was a great deal of confusion over the Home Office's initial statement. So the initial statement from the Home Office said very clearly, in black and white, that the 54 would be for the first year of the uplift. And we were sitting then in the year 2019 to 20. And therefore we went back to clarify with them. So that's 54, not 18 then, that we're expecting in the year 2019 to spring 2020. And they came back to say, no, it's 18 for 2019 to 20, and the remainder of the 54 over the next year, so effectively 2020 to 21. So the statement I made to you was absolutely truthful at the time in October. It was absolutely quoting from the black and white of the initial Home Office statement, and then they came back to clarify it and say, no, not 54 this year, 18 this year, and the remainder of the 54 in the next year. However, I can absolutely guarantee to you that we will be recruiting that 54 because the mood music from the Home Office is saying that any uplift they're about to give policing and the policing settlement that we expect on the 23rd will be paid partially in arrears on the basis that every force that has been promised extra officers will deliver that number. And it's consequently our intention to over-recruit, because we obviously know we lose some recruits during the training process, to make absolutely certain that we deliver that 54 and get our settlement in full. So I was absolutely truthful at the point when I reported. I was disappointed that it was not 18. It was not 54 plus more for the next year. However, we've been able to clarify the position subsequently. And those 54 will be recruited over this period, the period to the end of spring, the end of our financial year, this year, and into next year to 2022. Now, the government has said that it will be going on to address the funding formula. None of us in this room can fail to ignore the fact that we've just had a general election and we're about to have Brexit at the end of January. And so what is unknown, as we sit here, is exactly when they're going to fundamentally redraw the funding formula. You'll know, because promises have been given to me, both publicly and privately, by the previous policing minister, and publicly in the House to Andrew Selous MP in asking questions by Nick Hurd, the previous policing minister, that they are fundamentally going to address Bedfordshire's position. But it may be 3 years before they get round to looking at that funding formula again. What I would say is that those who are involved in the discussion of the uplift very largely come from the Metropolitan Police Forces, where the National Police Chiefs Council is concerned. It's not exactly in their interests to have a redrawing of the existing pot for policing in order to lose money to forces like ourselves and Lincolnshire. And this is the problem with the way it's been addressed in the past. It has to be talking about extra money, not deductions of money from the Metropolitan Police Forces for you to have a fully honest argument at the table.
No, of course, I would agree with you, and I appreciate that helpful clarification. So we're hopeful then for 160 officers plus 54 in the and perhaps a handful more to account for the unfortunate wastage during training.
And as you know, I've been absolutely determined that I wouldn't just be planning for recruitment within my term. Whatever happens at the ballot box moving forward, we have produced medium-term plans beyond that. So we were intending to recruit 110 next year, 120 next year, and between 110 and 120 the year after. That is before we had the uplift. So, but we've since then had the CREST modelling work to look at our existing and predicted future demand. And this is why it's so essential. I need the Home Office to see with complete precision and currency, not us quoting the demand and funding analysis report of 2017, not us looking back to the position of 2018 and 2019. What, as we sit here in 2020, with a very clear understanding of our business and our business moving forward in terms of demand, do we actually need in terms of officers now, despite my legacy of planning and the 54 and moving forward? So obviously I robustly fight for every officer. I'm not wanting to sound as if this is so great. I am grateful for every officer, but I am saddened that still we have no absolute concrete guarantee of the date at which the funding formula, which sits at the base of all this, which undermines Bedfordshire's policing as it does, when that is going to be finally resolved.
I'm grateful. I had one other question as well, which is that you mentioned the cost of the referendum a few minutes ago, and you've previously said, when it's been relevant from time to time, that the referendum cost £1 million that the force could ill afford, and I would agree with you in that. I'm sure the rest of the panel would. But I can't help but notice that in the published Freedom of Information responses on page 6 from June 2015, the cost of the referendum is quoted here at 600,000. Is this not accurate?
I don't believe that is an accurate figure, and I quote a senior representative of the staff of my predecessor at the time, who said to me that in his view, having worked within that office, the time of the OPCC's staff, the time of the PCC and the legal expenses would have amounted to an additional 400,000. And perhaps I could ask Phil to comment on that. That came to me directly from one of the most senior staff who worked for my predecessor.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, I think the 600,000, Damien, relates to the actual costs that we as a commissioner have had to pay to the three local authorities to run the election campaign. So what Catherine's then talking about is a legal cost on top of that, legal advice, the staff time, etc., etc. So the overall opportunity cost, I guess, of another 400,000 on top of that actual cost.
No, that's fine. Entirely happy to accept that. Obviously, you know, it's an inconsistency. I can't help but ask a question about it. But thank you.
Absolutely, David. It's your job to hold me to account. I give you information which is accurate. You'd appreciate, as with the previous figures, we were dependent for those around recruitment on the Home Office, and I change my tune the moment they changed theirs. But we're very happy always to clarify any of the information that we either bring to the panel or publicly. In terms of a referendum, I think it would be even more difficult currently for any subsequent PCC to hold a referendum in Bedfordshire. And the reason for that is that, of course, people have heard this figure, 20,000 uplift in policing nationally from government. And I think that the public very much think, oh, well, sorted then. Well, it very much isn't where Bedfordshire Police is concerned, or Lincolnshire, for that matter.
Well, indeed, and the last I say on this, which is, of course, that 20,000 nationally doesn't even replace what was cut over the last 10 years. So it's not an uplift. It's merely a correction of what was a cut. So I see the quandary that you're in.
I absolutely agree with that point, Damien. And also, of course, we have to take into account the rise in demand since that period, since the beginning of austerity when we lost those officers. Look at the rise in cybercrime that we're all very well aware of sitting around this board here, this panel today, around crimes like stalking. A lot of you will have seen on the news the new powers, civil powers passing to policing, around sexual crimes and CSE, whether historic or current. So you have to look at not only what was lost, but what is the situation now in terms of increased demand, and what does it look like into the future? And that's why it's been so important to me that we had Crest in to give us those answers.
Thank you very much for those discussions and clarifications. I think I would just add, as one of the few people I think that were here, I think Alison was here when we had the referendum and the discussions on referendum. As a panel, I think we would be highly, highly anti any further referendum. It is just an impossibility and it's just a waste of time. But hopefully we won't have to go there anyway. A couple of queries from me on the report, if I may. We commented earlier when we were looking at the minutes for the last meeting that it was minuted at the last meeting that Bedford Lime Street Hub was now open 7 days a week. In your actions from the last one, last panel, it says it's open 5 days a week. Can you just clarify when it is open?
So I'm told that it's open 7 days a week, and the only minor point on that at the moment is that for the reporting of sex offenders, they're still coming to Kempston over the weekends, and Phil will provide you with a more detailed explanation of that. We're in a process of transition around our statutory responsibilities there, but it's open 7 days a week.
Chair, that sexual offences piece is that the site has to be designated by the Secretary of State, and at the moment headquarters is that designated site, so we're going through the process to get Lime Street designated.
And then Lime Street will be open Saturday.
Lime Street's open 7 days anyway. But
It's just your report 5 says has been confirmed to be open Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, not open at weekends.
Yeah, that was the case when the report was done. It is now open in terms of Inquiry Office, but we have to keep the headquarters open at weekends for the sexual offences people.
And can I please clarify that? That isn't a mistake by Claire, at that point, when the papers were submitted to panel, we were still going through the consultation with the Inquiry's Office staff. The consultation is now complete.
And one last item, actions from the last panel, the third one. The panel requested more information from the Chief Financial Officer to provide information in relation to the 79k from capital programme to be treated as revenue. Phil, you're here, so can you comment?
Yeah, apologies, I wasn't here at the last meeting. What this is you may recall that we, in policing, have set up what's called a National Police ICT Company. So in essence, what's happened previously is, as a police organisation, we have purchased our own IT licences, which, because they're licences over a period of time, we can class them as an asset, we can record them on our balance sheet, and we can capitalise them. In essence, what we're now doing is a police ICT company are buying the licences, and we're buying a service from the police ICT company. So we don't own the asset, police ICT company do, so we can't capitalise the costs. What I think you'll see in terms of our funding that we get from the government is our capital contributions will go down to reflect the fact that police ICT company are now the ones actually incurring that capital cost, is what I intend to see.
Make sure you get the revenue back
Okay,
in.
thanks. Sorry?
So you need to make sure you get that revenue back in then on the other line, and the government doesn't use this as an opportunity to cut your budget.
Very true. We'll wait and see what comes out on the 23rd, but I think there will be some smokes and mirrors, as there usually is with police funding.
Okay, we move on from item 5A, the Commissioner's update, to item 5B, which... Sorry?
Milestone.
Yes, that's right. I'm just trying to find the... Okay, again, we have the report. Has anyone got any questions they want to raise on it? No? Can I ask one within it? On page 27, considerations, you're talking about tasers. And it's not the Triforce view to make tasers standard issue, as we know, because our neighbouring county, Northamptonshire, has made a lot of noise nationally and locally about it. What are our rough numbers on tasers as a percentage of the front line?
Well, I'm going to refer back to Phil and Claire for the specific percentage, but I think actually the underlying question that you would have is why not? So the fact is that I support my Chief Constable. It's quite clear to me that whether or not police officers are equipped with tasers and carry them is an operational decision for a Chief Constable and has nothing whatsoever to do with a PCC. It would be illogical for me to be involved in telling my chief what to equip other officers with. In fact, the closest I've got to it was a request that the force look at stop and search scrutiny, the knife ones, to better protect our officers and also to provide a less intrusive search for young people in particular. And the force did exactly that. ACC Sabir went and did a study, and they came back and did equip with knife wands. So as you would expect, I would ask through Stratboard, why is it that we have the attitude that we do? Not every police officer wants to carry a taser. Imagine a situation if almost all officers carried tasers. An officer decided they did not want to do so, and their partner was injured in the course of an incident, what the outcome would be for them, for example. We believe that we have taser use at the right sort of level. As you know, it's a decision which is taken at Triforce level, but I will defer to Phil and Claire for the specific percentage detail. If we don't have it, we'll return it to you at a future panel or in the interim.
Chair, just in terms of specific, I'll give a teeth in for numbers. The current number is 120 with tasers in our organisation. We're just increasing that to 152 due to the increase that we've had in terms of turnover since the Commission has been, in numbers since the Commission has been in post. So we'll be moving to 152 in terms of Bedfordshire. But it's all done through what is called a national STRA process, which is a strategic threat and risk assessment, and we stick to that rigidly. So that will tell us, out of all the numbers we've got on our front line, how many actually need to carry tasers. And what that really means is everybody that's out on response has got a taser with them at all times.
Could I add that I am deeply disquietened by the suggestion from anybody, a politician more generally, at Parliament or a PCC, that tasers are some sort of knee-jerk reaction politically and that they in themselves will make officers safer. What we have to make sure is that we bring about a situation in which officers are safer from assault across the board. And you may have seen my new statements in the last week. As you know, I supported and encouraged cross-party support for the increase in sentencing from a period of 6 months to 12 months on a police officer assaulted in the course of the execution of their duties. I consider that that is still appallingly low when you have sentences that are 5 times higher for injuring an animal. What message are we sending to our police officers about the value that we place on them, their safety and their protection, when they stand between us and keeping the public safe?
Thank you very much for that. Amanda.
Yeah, I wondered if I could ask a question on the estates. I note that we've been doing quite a lot of collaboration with the blue light services, and I wondered whether we felt with increased numbers of police officers whether we've got sufficient accommodation and space. I know police officers don't spend their time sat in offices, that's not the idea, but if you go and visit, say, Leighton Buzzard police station, that's now part of the fire station, it's like a broom cupboard. I mean, if you can get 3 desks in there, you're lucky, and if you can make yourself a cup of tea. I just feel that we need to have quality accommodation to enable our new officers to actually feel that they've got a good place to work in as well when they're not actually out on the beat.
So you'll celebrate the fact that just in the last fortnight, for example, another hub space was created, again at a building which is already paid for by the public at Toddington Fire Station. And you make the very important point, Amanda. We don't want them sitting in stations. We want them out and about. That's why our officers are equipped with mobile devices. And in terms of the hubs, for example, that I was most recently out on in Biggleswade, had PCSOs who were out and about. Instead of sitting in the Biggleswade office to do their paperwork, though it obviously isn't paperwork now, it's electronic, they actually sit in hotspots for drug dealing and so on. I would rather by far that our officers were out of an office and sitting in an area where they can be an active deterrent, even when they're completing their administrative tasks. And that is the thrust of Bedfordshire Police. And in terms of the overall estate and making use of it, you will know that I have a commitment in my police and crime plan to a duty of care to our officers. Part of that is increasing their well-being through their environment. I am currently in the process of spending £50,000 at Luton Police Station in improving the environment in which they work. It hasn't been touched for the most part since the 70s or early 80s. I've done the same at Dunstable in terms of the inquirer's office space, the corridor spaces. I'm moving on to Biggleswade in terms of the facilities for our PCs and PCSOs and their kitchen space. We are doing as much as we possibly can to improve the surroundings in which our officers work, because I entirely agree with you that surroundings and environment are absolutely key to the well-being of our staff. And if we're wanting to look at retaining them, we want to make absolutely certain that they can see from the facilities that are provided for them, not only to use as office space, where they won't be spending very much time, but where they come into a kitchen, for example, or where they have a rest area. In addition to the breathing space, you'll be aware that I've created that at HQ, and another one's being created at Luton, so that those who are on response, and in HQ's case, those who are in the force contact centre, the old control room, are concerned that after particularly traumatic events, they have somewhere to go that's appropriate in terms of its environment to take a few minutes out, and it will be a few minutes out in Bedfordshire, but a few minutes out, so that they can gather their thoughts and so on. So I am absolutely committed to improving their environment. Simply creating more office space for officers to sit in is not actually my priority. I want them out and about, and I suggest that that's exactly where the communities of Bedfordshire want them to.
Just some positive feedback.
Sorry.
Yeah, whilst I totally agree with you, I just feel that in areas where you've got a growing community, for instance, Houghton Regis and Leighton Buzzard, you need to actually have the policing facilities to be able to police that town. And a broom cupboard really doesn't do it, to be honest. It's very cramped. I mean, you haven't really got all the blue light services together on that site. I think you know, you along with the other blue light services need to be looking at a better option. And also the public would like access to police officers, and a number of our police stations aren't open and they're not able to get that access.
So, Amanda, as you'll be very well aware, Leighton Buzzard Police Station is not an inquirer's office. And if members of the public want access to Bedfordshire Police, they have more ways of gaining access than ever previously. The vast majority of us have a mobile phone and they have access to a computer. So that's two ways that they can engage with their police. And through our police website, if they look at your local area, they'll actually see the email addresses to directly engage with members of the team. I absolutely do not support the statement that it's a broom cupboard. I too have regularly been down in at Leighton Buzzard, but we're not about provision of office space, we're about provision of officers getting out and about, and the whole point of giving them mobile devices and investing as heavily as we have in devices where they can complete that paperwork in inverted commas when they're actually out and about on the street, on the job, has been what the Chief Constable tells me he wants to do with his police officers, and he absolutely has my support.
Obviously, you weren't at Central Bed Full Council meeting last Thursday evening, but on the report on the fire service report, okay, the members for Tollington did praise the work that's being done in Tollington with the joined-up working there. And I know some time ago I instigated through the local members there getting in touch with the fire service and the police to try and see if we could pull those two together. So I just want to say thank you for that. So.
It's very much indeed, Ian. The thank yous are thin on the ground, as you know. But I've always, it's there in the police and crime plan, I've always supported the joint use of buildings, the public already pay for, wherever we could. And I think the rationale behind fire working with us, which they have done to an absolutely exemplary extent, really shows how far we've moved on in the last few years. I remember the Chief Fire Officer pointing to the fact that at Ampthill, for example, the ambulance service moved in to share the community fire station, whilst their own separate station was built opposite. These days, they wouldn't have been building a separate station opposite. It would have been alongside and as part of fire and police, ideally on a single site. That's the way that we're moving into the future. And certainly I have encountered no difficulties whatsoever in the whole of this term in terms of their attitude to collaboration from Bedfordshire Fire and Rescue Service, which means that it is one of the most exemplary collaborations anywhere in the country between police and fire.
Councillor Hendricks.
Yeah, I wondered whether you could give an update on the sale of Greyfriars Police Station, what the next steps are and the timelines for that.
So I was just before you. I was going to say also by default we've moved on to estates.
Right, yeah, sorry. So you appreciate that it was my view, and we all know that you gain more for a site if you have outline planning permission. So the first thing that we acquired, I addressed the planning meeting, we acquired outline planning permission for change of use. We've followed and worked very closely with Bedford Borough's planning officers. So Bedford Borough wanted to have they want a lively street scene at street level. So they want a building which could be either a retail unit or a cafe at street level, and to have units for housing above. So we have, first of all, we've acquired that permission for that change of use. We now move on to the full outline permission, and Phil can give us an update on the meeting that we'll hear it now, because that's been slightly fluid recently.
So the PCC will kick me now because this is information that I haven't given her because I've only got it this morning. But the outline planning permission has been submitted today to Bedford Borough for Greyfriars. So we will most probably find out the result of that application around March, at which point, and bearing in mind we've worked very closely with the planning, linked in with their one public estate, linked in with their local plan that's just recently been agreed, we're fairly confident that that will get a positive reaction.
Okay, thanks for that update. Any other questions on estates before we move on? No, then we'll move on rapidly to item 5D, which is 7 Force collaboration paper. Again, we've seen the paper. Has anyone got any questions on collaboration? No, I do have one, which is on page 60, we talk about the BCH complaints reform process. Is that still likely to come in effect from the 1st of Feb? It is. Claire, I'm sure you'd like to say a few words on it.
You know I love it. So actually, observing the meeting today is our compliance officer, Katie Beaumont, who has been working with the force on this as this has come in. Yes, we are still looking at February. Katie's been on all the appropriate training. We've got one more training session to go on for the actual system, but we are going live. We've presented before on the option, but what we were saying at the pre-meeting for panel was that we could really do with coming back to the panel and giving you a thorough brief once we're up and running with how is it working, how does the complaints come in, how do we assess. So I think that would be really useful if you're happy at the April meeting, Chair.
Absolutely, because it is going to have a knock-on effect, I think, to the panel.
It certainly would, yes.
Because we will now look at complaints against, well, we already look at complaints against the Commissioner, and there's likely to be more with them taking over more responsibility.
Yeah, and we might need to look at vetting as well.
So we'll add that to the April meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no further questions on force collaboration, move on to 5E funding. We've talked an awful lot already about funding, and we've explained, the Commissioner's explained the timings or the expected timings. So I'm just going to throw it open to see if there's any more questions on funding anyone wants to raise. We've got Phil here. It's the ideal opportunity.
Could I just add a comment, just so that you know that I've gone as fully for the special grant bid as you would anticipate that I would. So there is a range within our second special grant bid. You'll appreciate that the first one was specifically to cover the cost of the Op Bosun specialist response to gun, gang and knife crime that you heard being referred to by both Jackie and Kimberley as so essential in Bedfordshire. And what more do they get for more? They got twice the amount of Bosun activity in this county because we were able to create a Bosun team for the north of the county, which covers central Bedfordshire too, of course, as well as the south of the county, which reaches up into the south of central Bedfordshire. So the special grant did not cover the whole of the costs that fell out of that for the end of the year. So the additional costs that were not covered by the first special grant of 4.571 million, we've also made a bid for. We've also looked at the sexual exploitation, which comes with gang memberships. You'll have heard me talk before around sexual initiations, around the sexual exploitation of individuals, very often young girls, who are caught up in gang activity. And so we have put the entire costs for CSE, for Bosun for this year into next year, and for the costs that were not covered by the Bosun grant last year into our bid, which means that our bid runs from around 2.5 to 5.7 million, in terms of its overall range. So it will be for government to determine, with the new policing minister, Kit Malthouse. We know we're going to get the grant, but where exactly is it going to sit across that range? That I can't tell you right now. But the extra money is coming, on top of the very money, on top of the uplift money. And I'd just like to say a little word around what that uplift money funded. I've referred to the fact that there have been 200 years of prison terms that have been gained through Bosun in its enhanced and enlarged form. But we've had some incredibly successful results in bringing gangs, and particularly county lines gangs, to boot, particularly through paying for fast-track forensics, excuse me, so that we can much more expediently retain people in detention and charge them following arrest, because we've been able to fast-track the forensics, including an individual who was returned to prison, having his identity having been established to serve a very significant jail term, individuals who have been tracked to significant seizures of Class A and B drugs, counterfeit money and weapons, and following a burglary at a cannabis farm. So among that 200 years, the fast-track forensics that we've been able to pay for has paid huge dividends. And this obviously is all operational activity overseen by ACC Sabir and not myself, but also providing a daily analysis of serious youth violence and gang violence, which produces in turn a data product which informs not only policing and where policing resources are going to be placed, but the activities of all of our partners through the Veru. So we know what's happening immediately as it happens, and therefore react in fast time to deal with those pockets of activity. And if Jackie had been able to stay, she would have referred to Op Sparkler, and Op Sparkler is the specific operational sudden flush uplift which has been paid for through that 1.38 million. At the beginning of the year, it was in Houghton Regis and immediately resulted in arrests and drug seizures and a weapons seizure on the very first day. It's producing huge results, significant results for Bedfordshire Police, and certainly, together with the work of the Veru, is behind this levelling off and plateauing of hospital admissions. We can't be complacent. Even one hospital admission is unacceptable over knife crime and so on, and a very significant series of results, which I hope you've seen Bedfordshire Police reporting in the news, including working with and work against organised crime groups, including releasing individuals from human trafficking or modern-day slavery that was nationally reported in the news, and which Matt Parr, our HMI, directly congratulated me on the day afterwards. So hugely significant activity. Bedford in particular has become a very inhospitable place in which to be a drug dealer on county lines.
Phil, I will come to you in a second. I just wanted to make a comment, really, that and to raise caution, because our next meeting, February the 4th, isn't far away. You've got a lot of work to do, and we've got to understand the settlement. But we could also become victims of our own success. There's no doubt at all the success you've had from continuing to beat away at the Home Office in every aspect on funding, and the number of special grants we talk about, the uplift monies we talk about. You know, it's almost getting, you know, smoke and mirrors already. There's so much going into the pot. How the public ever know where we actually stand as Bedfordshire Police really concerns me, and we've got a very difficult decision to make on February the 4th. I think it's going to be pretty fundamental that the one thing that remains in my mind through all of this is that 2 years ago at least, we were talking about we're 300 officers short and 50 to 70 detectives, something like that. I couldn't actually sit here today and say this is where we are today against that. So that's still our ultimate goal, or that might well have moved. But I think that message has got to come over loud and clear in the coming weeks. Otherwise, everyone's going to be going, oh, we've got all these special grants, we've got all this uplift money, the policing settlements come through, it's really good this year, and you still want to go for £24 or whatever it may be in the council tax. We need to understand where we are on the journey. We're still a long way, in my understanding, from that ultimate goal.
Absolutely right, Paul, and that's exactly why I've tasked Phil and the finance team with producing the figures, given all of the information to date, the uplifts I've been able to create and that the government are creating to date. Where do we stand here in 2020, looking ahead to 2021? And that work, given that Crest work too, looking at future and current demand. And that's exactly what he's doing, so that Gary and I, as always, I can stand shoulder to shoulder with my Chief Constable with a complete evidence trail of why it is that we're asking for this now. But you're right, there is a real problem that the public consciousness is that this is something which has been dealt with.
And I guess with all the special grants and uplifts, etc., we're about to lose several millions from the money that's been coming in going forward. It's, you know, we've been talking again this morning about very needing long-term funding. We've had all these short-term bursts. We have not fixed the fundamental problem.
If I could perhaps try to conclude my part of this meeting on an optimistic note, whilst it would obviously be wholly improper of me to indicate what government is thinking, I don't anticipate money going down, or even standing steady. Okay. Anything else on funding, Phil? You were indicating, I don't know whether we've covered it, but...
I'll be really brief, Chair. One was just a little bit of flexibility. Bearing in mind the settlement won't come out until the 23rd. The force need to then review that and understand what budget it wants to submit to the PCC. The PCC then reviews that with the Chief Constable before we can submit the papers here. We've got a statutory obligation to get it to you by the 31st, which we'll obviously do, but we'll try and get it sooner than that if we can, but it might not meet the normal reporting timescales we work to. and the other point I was going to make, Chair, was just that bit you've talked about in terms of just managing expectations. We have 80% of our costs that are going up by 2% pay award. We have 60% of our funding which will stay static. So what we are looking at is what savings we need to deliver at the same time as receiving some funding to deliver the 20,000 uplift, and that's the balance we've got to try and get right. As the Commissioner says, so we think the drip feed we've had, that is relatively positive on the basis that what the government have said previously is the uplift funding will just be for paying for the 20,000 officers. We think they've put a bit of flexibility around that says actually some of that would be more general grant, so it may be able to box at that difference between the costing and the funding off.
And if I could underline why that's so important, that given those costs that don't stand still for us, that inevitably rise, whether that's around insurance, whether it's around pensions, whether it's around pay, if there was no additional uplift, Bedfordshire Police would need to find £6 million in savings. So that is why it's so critical that I have continued, terrier-like as you would expect, to argue our corner and case.
Thank you very much for that clarity. And we did discuss it at the pre-meeting, actually, Phil. I think the Association of Commissioners has already been to the Home Office and sort of said, we can't meet your statutory requirements with the timings you're now giving us. So I think, yeah, we're all going to have to be very swift on our feet in the next couple of weeks to understand what on earth is going on, read the papers beforehand so we can have a good debate here on February the 4th. Good luck. Okay, moving on. Item 5F, recruitment. Any questions on recruitment, Councillor?
I'm going to ask a question on behalf of Councillor Graham because she asked me to follow up on this. All the red boxes on the Community Hub recruitment, just get some clarification of why are they red and what is being done about it, because I think it's a broader issue as well. It's not so much, I mean, it is about kind of funding for the police officers, but that if we then can't recruit it, it's a moot point. So.
Thank you. A fair question. I appreciate it's not yours. This action came from quite a few panels ago when the commitment was made that 67 officers would go into the community function. I made the commitment that at every panel meeting we would show how that recruitment was going. The reason why I flagged something in red is when we're still not there. The date for completion is the end of April and we are still well on target to achieve that, which is when we will see those red boxes turn green. We've just been very honest that they are not there yet, but we are very much nearly there. Thank you.
A quick question. What's the average time from deciding we need an officer to when actually they are there in situ?
In terms of recruitment from the beginning, the whole process can take a year. And the reason for that is something which is obviously unavoidable, which is that if you're going to come to be a police officer, you and those connected to you need to be very extensively vetted. So you have your application process, you then have your vetting process, you then have national search interviews, and then, because we're not prepared in Bedfordshire to just say, oh, that's fine, you passed national search, you're fit to become an officer in Bedfordshire, we then have a repeat interview, effectively. We have an interview to make sure that you are suitable to work in this highly diverse county, given its very specific challenges. Is there anything you'd like to add to that at all?
The only bit I was going to add, Chair, was the bit around the shortfall in community. So what's really positive is the Commissioner has given the funding to recruit the officers. The officers then go through a recruitment process of 2 years and where they have to learn their skills, and the majority of those skills are learnt in response rather than on community, so there's a bit of a time gap between those officers being able to go into another area which then releases officers to go into community. But as Claire said, community we expect to be fully populated by April.
Thanks for that explanation. Councillor Ali.
Commissioner, I note that we discussed special constables earlier on, and kind of our agenda for today has been a bit of a mix and match as we've gone along. I know from your documentation here that there is no mention of any special constables, what the recruitment numbers are for them and what the requirements are.
So we discussed special constables earlier to an extent, and I'll refer back to Claire over those. There is a continuous ongoing recruitment process there. But as I said, through the priority-based budgeting process, we wanted to look at that whole volunteer section too. I'm very keen that we make sure, and have been throughout, that we examine every possible area from which we can recruit, hence us having explored corporate social responsibility in the past, hence us wanting to look to local authorities to release individuals during paid time now, hence Claire talking about us approaching the mental health organisations, because they would obviously be ideal. But I'll pass to Claire for further detail around our current recruitment of special constables.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councillor, you're quite right. So this paper was only on community, because that was the ask from the panel, was around those community placements. But I'd be more than happy to bring a paper back on specials and where they're mainly utilised. So they're not always localised as in they stay in one place. They're very reactive and will go where we need. But I could bring back the data on how many volunteers we've got, how many specials we've got, if that would assist the panel at all.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Bunyan.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask the Commissioner for a quick update on the rural policing strategy, please, given the gaps that we've just spoken about in the reds that are in the missings?
So, Councillor Bunyan, I'll do a quick resume, because obviously you've relatively newly come to the panel. So when I arrived as PCC, we didn't have one single officer at Bedfordshire Police who was specialising in rural crime. With a fortnight of me arriving, because I'd had discussions with the executive team at Bedfordshire Police, and in particular the DCC, a rural crime strategy was announced, and an initial rural crime officer, who was a sergeant whose own background was in farming, his family background was in farming, started, and the NFU worked with me, as they'd promised to do prior to the election, to form what is in effect a rural crime intelligence network throughout this county, which works exceptionally well. They base themselves around a WhatsApp group, but they also know the members of the rural crime team extremely well. I now refer to rural crime team. We have the largest rural crime team now in 2020 of any police force among the 7 police forces of the East of England, from having no police officer at all specialising in rural crime. And that's because my office worked with the force to produce a business case for a rural crime team. And by rural crime, what we mean is a crime which takes place specifically because of its rural location, not just any crime in the countryside. And obviously that will immediately flag up crimes like hair coursing, like heritage theft, lead from church roofs, and theft of large-scale agricultural plant, for example, to ram raid cash machines, all of the above. They have been having an exceptionally successful year. I hold a conference each year to connect with the rural community. That's not the only time that I, or the force certainly, get together with our rural community, in particular the farmers. The last one was held in December at Schooldend Farm in North Bedfordshire, which is the farm owned by the farmer and Bedford Borough Councillor Martin Towler. Excuse me. And the remark that was made from a visiting superintendent of both that and the parish council's conference, which I hold each year, which is equally relevant when we're talking about rural communities, is that he could not believe how far we've travelled in 4 years since I held those first 2 conferences. Because it's fair to say, and I'm going to reflect this in my police and crime plan for the end of term, but particularly for this year around these comments, that when I first arrived, Bedfordshire Police had been so much under the cosh and so subject to criticism, particularly out in the smaller towns and rural communities who felt there was no visibility or connection, that there was something of a feeling, well, what's the point in this public engagement on the basis that people don't understand us and what we are trying to do? Well, now, when we have so much that we can talk about and which has been successfully delivered out in the countryside community in terms of regular contact, the whole tone of those 2 conferences in 2019 to 20 was all about what more can we do to work with you even more effectively, given that what's now in place for rural communities is working to an even greater extent. So I certainly hope that every member of the Police and Crime Panel will attend my end-of-term 4th year report launch. And is it April the 23rd? Is that what? It's April the 23rd. It'll be April the 23rd. You'll obviously all be invited so that you can see the totality of what's been achieved in the last year and over the last 4 years. But it is a completely transformed picture. I mean, the work that we've been doing in the last year around ANPR, automatic number plate recognition, for example, getting rid of the conception that certainly, preconception that people had in the past in rural communities around illegal travel encampments. Oh, the police don't check their MOT, their tax, their insurance. Rubbish. We do it constantly to see if the threshold of criminality has been reached so that individuals can be moved on. The way in which the communities now understand, those representatives from the parish councils and those representatives of the NFU now understand what's actually being delivered. We have travelled a vast distance in that time, notwithstanding the very real constraints on Bedfordshire Police in terms of its size, because as you know, I cannot wave a magic wand and produce extra officers based on nothing. And I'm all about the sustainability and the longer-term planning. This isn't about getting some short-term political win for me. It's about making this a sustainable movement into the future. And the changes in terms of perception of rural communities is something of which I am exceptionally proud, and which was commented on by more than one chief superintendent who'd been part of the most recent NFU conference and parish councils conference.
Any other questions on recruitment before we move on? Then we will move on to item 5G, which is the results of the public and partner engagement. Is there any... I thought you would want to add something.
Sorry. Chair, if I may, I know we touched on it slightly during the pre-app, but in terms of numbers of respondents, the OPCC are very aware that the number of respondents for this survey is not of a type that you would take every single answer as a good measure. It's far too low. If I may, the Police Foundation in November just released a report that they spent a year working on, which was all about, and I'm happy to share the link through Jeremy, which is all about how you truly understand the public's priorities. And they did a lot of research into key methodology, and I totally appreciate, I'm losing my commissioner at this point. She does not appreciate my interest in the social research methods. However, they talked about when you ask a question to members of the public, and then you spend time in educating, in sharing information about what is going on, and then you ask those same questions again. Does that alter the effect of the answers that you get? And that is something that I would like the panel to consider, that we change for the survey approach for next year, where we actually choose some individuals from different representatives across people in Bedfordshire, and we work with them in asking questions, then doing an education piece, then asking again, if you wouldn't mind considering it. Overall, there were still a couple of key updates that I think are important, even from the number that we had, and that was to do with victim care, and it was also to do with a question that was raised earlier, which is about where do you go to make those reports. So 2 actions came to Strategic Board last Thursday directly from this piece of work. So I hope that offers people who filled in this survey assurance that we took the results seriously. Number 1, in terms of victim care, people were definitely saying that the quality of that care has improved, which we were really pleased to note because this is the first survey since Signpost was launched. However, there is clearly an issue with people being referred to it and their awareness of it. So my comment in that paper was that that has directly affected the review of Signpost that I'm leading on. Communication, both with our partners and public, is key. The Commissioner did an awful lot of work when Signpost was launched. Since then, we need to go back. Do we still have those connections we had with partners in those early days? Are they still working? The second area around communication around the stations. If you go on the Bedfordshire Police website, there are indicators as to where you can go to report, that you can use a text-based service, you can use the web. However, even myself working so closely with the force don't recognise every detail that is on this map, and I think there could be an improvement. So at Strategic Board, the force have taken an action to go and look at actually how we communicate opening times, what places are open all the time, what is a place of safety, what isn't. So I think those are 2 really positive things that came out from the survey, although I appreciate the actual mix of respondents was not quite good enough. And sorry, one more point on it. We've always had the issue of 16 to 24, getting the opinion of young people. Surveys are never the way to engage with our youth. So on the 24th of February, we have the first event where the Commissioner asked us to set up the Youth Engagement Committee. We have that. We're using Instagram to start that. We are actually going to try using a different technique and using what young people use to communicate with each other instead of doing something that we use to communicate. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Henry.
Yeah, on the survey, I think I do understand your issues around the methodology, but I think it's equally important or more important to try and boost the numbers to increase the validity of the survey. I think that's probably where we need to start and find perhaps different ways of reaching people. And in addition to that, just as a comment in terms of the Youth Engagement Committee, I hope that that you will be working with the existing youth cabinets and youth groups that are, I'm sure, present in most of the local authorities.
We absolutely are, Chair. There's just one element is that sometimes they're not as diverse as we might hope, and we wanted to achieve a youth space that was both children that are going to school every day as well as children who are not, and that's why we've come up with this different approach to do it. But thank you, point taken.
Just to follow through on that, I know definitely for Bedfordshire that the Youth Cabinet is representative and the engagement team has links with a lot of youth groups. So I would really hope that you take that opportunity to work with them rather than to set up a different group again. Thank you.
We're not greatly in favour of reinventing the wheel. You're absolutely right. We do want to reach cross diversity. One other point I'd like to make around public engagement is, and this is an absolutely genuine comment, in the whole of my term, not a single individual, not one member of the public or partner has come up to me outside this panel and has criticised me for raising the precept by the maximum that's available to me. Not one in all of the hundreds of engagements that I've made. And that suggests to me that the message has well and truly landed in Bedfordshire that in general we need to be able to fund the maximum number of officers that we can.
Any further comments before we move on? Then we are at the end of the Police and Crime Commissioner's update, the longest section, so feel free to go, Commissioner. And thank you very much for your attendance and for Phil and Claire. Was there any update on Councillor Graham? Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your attention for it. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 6 on the agenda, co-opted members. Right, I was missing for the last 2 meetings, my apologies, when all this work on co-opted members came along. But it's been agreed by the panel that we are going to take on and look for 2 additional co-opted members. We've done the advertising, and I believe the interviews are on Thursday of this week. That's correct. We have 2 vacancies. It's going to be a long process because we have got the interview process to go through, we've got the vetting of them to go through, and then we have to go to the Home Office to ask permission to increase the numbers. So I don't know when they'll be live, although I think the officers are checking out whether they can sit on the panel before the Home Office have truly approved them. Not quite sure. You've seen all the emails about interviewing on Thursday. We were struggling to get in people for the interview team. One question I do want to raise with the panel, I spoke to both Sue and Jeremy over the last couple of weeks, and when you were struggling for members of the interview panel last week, I volunteered that I could sit on it if you needed me to. We always try and take elected members from each of the 3 constituencies, but rather than be short, we checked out whether I could sit on it as an independent. I think I could, but it doesn't matter. We've got the 3 members now. Initially, the clerk of the panel, which is Phil Simpkins, our Chief Exec at Bedford Borough, was going to sit in on the interviews to make sure the process was okay. He's unable to now. And again, I said, I can volunteer to do that, to sit in and just observe, not to take part in the interviews at all. But it was suggested I come to the panel to ask if they were okay with that, with me sitting in. So if anyone's got any objections, please say it. Otherwise, yeah? you very much. So
I would actually look forward to your expertise there, to be honest, Paul.
Well, if I can just interject there, Paul, you said to me when I responded that I was unavailable, I was not aware that there was a rule in relation to who could sit in this. You said, you responded to me that co-opted members can't. So while sitting in and observing is one thing, providing input, which is what Councillor Bunyan just intimated toward, that perhaps might be in breach of the rules. So, for the sake of ensuring that we don't transgress those rules, perhaps your purpose there ought to be decided.
yeah, very, very valid. My comment to you, Damien, was, and you missed it, and I probably missed it to start with. The email that went out looking for volunteers for the interview panel was actually headed up elected members. Yeah. Yeah. The reason it's always been elected members is because we've always had only one round of interviews every 4 years for independent members, and therefore it's never been a question whether independents ever sit on that panel, because the other one's being interviewed, so it was a non-entity. So we went with the same process again, and that's indeed what we've ended up with, the same process with 3 elected members from the constituents sitting on the interview panel. We did, however, when we were short of numbers, check out whether independents can, and they can apparently sit on it, but we're not doing that. So I'm not there to intervene or anything, I'm just there to observe, and that is all. And it's fine. Not contravening any rules anyway for an independent.
And I'm entirely happy to accept that. It's obviously that you gave me one impression and not knowing. Yeah, well, and I took that to be correct. So if there isn't a rule as to the participation of independent, well then there's no need for you to seek permission, really. There we are.
So resolutions on that last
Oh.
the recommendations they resolved.
That the recruitment shortlist interview process set out have been noted, and the panel delegate authority to the clerk of the panel to take all action. Yeah, so we're happy with that. We have a panel of 3. They will come back to the next panel meeting. Will we fit it in on the 4th? Yes. Yeah, for a decision. And part of the point 3 members ideally. Yeah, I think we've agreed those, Caroline. Yep. Okay, moving on then to item 7, which is the panel activity report. The report's there. Has anyone got any comments to make on it? Well, happy with the report. Pretty basic, I've got to say. There are a couple of recommendations with this one, that we reduce the number of activity reports from 3 to 2 annually. We were criticised that we only did an annual one, so we went to 3. We're finding 3 is a bit much, I've got to say.
It's every other meeting.
It is, it's virtually, so you report on every meeting. So we want to revert to 2. Is everyone happy with 2 reports per annum?
Yeah, cool.
And that the new interim report, activity reports that we put out will be circulated by email rather than bringing them to the meeting, if that's okay with you all. Then you can comment by email. Okay. Item 8, panel information to Police and Crime Commissioner candidate. I haven't got a paper as such on that, but we've had a lot of discussions about the new Police and Crime Commissioner candidates and how we liaise with them. I think we've spoken in the past that as a panel, we probably feel there's a lot of good work been done over the last 4 years that we wouldn't want to wither on the vine and someone come in with a total about change. It's very difficult because the new Police and Crime Commissioner will be elected on what they say to the electorate, but then we have to ensure that we believe we've got them they are on the right track to do what they're supposed to do. And there is a lot of good stuff that I wouldn't want to see disappear. So we decided that we would have meetings with potential candidates for PCC in advance. I know the OPCC's office are doing that, and they've invited us to sit in on their meetings as well. I think their first meeting is in February, and I don't think anyone will know who the candidates are by February. So there's another one in May that there's another one in April that I think we've been invited to, and we've also, as a panel, been invited to the second full day of the new Commissioner's Day in office, so that we can interchange with him then. That's in May. So we'll circulate those dates. And we indeed have our own panel meeting, if you can remind me of the date, Jeremy?
21st of April. Which
is specifically for the panel and candidates to come along to. Okay. I think that's all we wanted to cover there.
It might be helpful to consider, I think this was one of the things we talked about previously, might be helpful to consider what you want to actually say to the candidates at that April meeting. And we don't need to do it now, but it might be worth having that conversation by email.
Yes.
I think what kind of issues want to be raised, and like I say, if you're going to take consistency forward and what wants to be carried forward into the next term of the Commissioner, what you want to discuss.
Yep, very valid point. We do need to get our heads around that before. Thank you. And last but by no means least, the forward programme, the work programme on there. As I said, the next meeting will be pretty much tied up with precept. Anyone got any comments on the forward plan? The only comment I would make is the 18th of February meeting is the provisional one that's slotted in case we have real problems on February the 4th and reject the precept. Other than that, no comments or queries on it except the forward plan. Fine. With that, thank you very much for your attendance. Sorry about the interruption. I do hope Alison's okay. Thank you very much. We'll see you in a couple of weeks, February the 4th, when we're at Bedford Borough.
Yes.
It is Bedford Borough, yeah.